That we are very close to 7 p.m. So let's get started with the Q&A session. All right, so this is going to be very casual. Feel free to unmute and turn on your video and just ask your question. I think we can probably start off with Mary, and we probably already answered a little bit about this, but does any of the panelists want to add anything to that? How do you decide on a new career path?
I'm gonna borrow, I think it was Steve Jobs that said this once in one of like the commencement speeches about connecting the dots. You never know when the skill set that you acquire in this particular job or position can actually come into play in your future jobs. I would like to think that all things are connected one way or the other, which means that the things that it's not about the actual job, but it's about what you're thinking of and what you're learning during the job, right? So it could be, like me working as a designer, for example, I could be just doing my day-to-day job for one, but I could also be thinking about the relationships between the design work that I do with something else, right? And being able to find those overlap points hopefully can lead you to a different sort of an alternative path if this particular career path is not a good fit for you, for example. Rather than thinking about, it's one thing if you only have a few years of experience, it's easier to make those sort of that transition. But obviously if you have done something for, let's say 10 years or something, then it becomes a harder of a move. And in those cases, there are ways to think about the skill set. And we talked about soft skill set before, or it could be software. You can think about ways in which you can sort of utilize that. And it's important to show whatever this new career path that you decide on, to show, rather than just saying that, I'm interested in this sort of a career, to show how the skills that you have accumulated and the experience that you have accumulated can actually transition to this sort of a new career path, right? What are the efforts that you are making before you get in the interview for this new position? What are the sort of efforts that you have made on your end to show this connection, to prove that the skill set and the experience that you have acquired is actually implementable and can be integrated into this other sort of a career path, whatever it might be, right?
If I may add to what Sae saying too, because I think it's really, I can give an example recently, although within my company, I found myself at a inflection point where I really wanted to expand what I could do and I wanted to learn more. So I think to piggyback on what Sae is saying, it's such a tiny thing that made a huge difference for me, was to not think so much of what don't I want to do anymore, but it's what do I want to do? What gives me joy? I had a couple of people who listened to what I was looking to do. And then I had a couple of people who maybe weren't so interested. That's okay. But you keep going and then you're consistent with what you're saying. If you say, oh, I want this, but I'm not really so sure, just choose the people with whom you have those conversations. I think it's good to have mentors that you can bounce off ideas, there are plenty of people now, I think, really not so much pivoting, but just rechanneling their energy, like saying that you already have some things that you can offer, I think coming with uniqueness from a different industry or different stage of a project, or from academia, into the construction industry, whatever the case may be. For me, it made a huge difference to think, not so much I don't want to do this anymore. It's not that I'm tired. It's just, what if, I don't have to do this, but what if I get to do something else? So when you present your idea to the person who's actually going to be impactful and can actually help you, be consistent and be persistent too. Don't go away. Just keep
Patricia. Yeah, Patricia brings up a good point, which is to reach out and engage in conversations. And one of the reasons why I actually started the YouTube channel was because on LinkedIn, I was getting a lot of messages every now and then from current students that randomly just found me somewhere, somehow, right, on LinkedIn, and they would be like, I'm a whoever, and I'm. Do you have some time to, sort of talk about, the path that I took, right? And I would sort of make time to engage, and this is before the baby, of course. I would make the time to engage in a conversation with them. I would set up a video call or whatever, and then I would have a conversation for like an hour or two about what they're interested in, right? So I would like to think that there are many people out there who would be willing to make time for you. So LinkedIn obviously is a good resource. You can find people that are sort of pursuing sort of whatever the career path that you are interested in. Reach out. I would say 90% of the time you're not going to hear back, but when you do hear back from somebody, maybe you can set up some sort of an informal conversation about what they're looking for as an employer, or what's the path that they took. And just again, when you send those messages, I wouldn't sort of say like, oh, can you get me an interview or can you get me a job kind of thing. Just be very genuine about where your interests are and how you want to sort of learn about the other person and how that can potentially benefit or inform your next career move. And I would like to think that I can't imagine anybody would be opposed to engaging in a conversation with you if you engage in a conversation sort of that way.
Thank you for your answers. And before we really open up, we want to answer to Krista's question about how can you avoid being pigeonholed into being put on the certain projects. I know Whitni and Sae briefly touched on it. So if Patricia or Ben, if you could add some points to that question, that would be great. Maybe.
Yeah, I guess in terms of the pigeonholing, I think just make sure that people you're working with or working for know that you want to be doing other things. And so just let them know that you might not be happy with that choice they're making to put you in a particular area. I mean, the different IDP hour requirements may be helpful because many firms will try to rotate people through different tasks, but I know it from my experience too, it can feel stuck after a while. So yeah, I think the other thing is to just get to know other people in your office and outside of your office, so that even if you are you're on one particular project or doing one particular task for a while, you are learning from and aware of all the other things that people are doing too, just as a way to see other tasks you could be doing or advocate other things you could be doing, and so you're not blind to those other opportunities. I would also just say, and maybe this is getting back to the previous question, but just stay engaged in a broader design community outside of your firm, whether that's just being in touch with friends who may be working at other places or going to BSA knowledge community meetings. I know I've had times in my career where I was too hunkered down and focused on the immediate job and deadline for way too long. And some of that is inevitable, but it got me a little out of touch with some of the other opportunities out there. So I think it's always important to keep looking beyond your job, and don't think of your job as being the central everything. It's just one choice, and you have other choices.
So I'll just add very quickly to what Sae said about reaching out. I think as far as mentorship goes or reaching out to somebody, you may not be super comfortable reaching out to your professor like Sae or to somebody with more experience. I think actually the horizontal mentorship is really powerful. So if there's a peer of yours that that has same level of experience or something, like those are like real life, like immediate tips you can get. And sometimes I think, like, I remember when I graduated from the graduate school here, I thought, wow, it's going to be super competitive. We're all looking for the same jobs. It's just a little bit humbling too when you're looking for a job because somebody goes, oh, wait, she didn't get the job or he got the job. Don't worry about it. This is, you have to kind of drop your vanity a little bit. Just go and ask people with whom you graduated from college, a lot of times even younger staff depending on where you are in your career. There's a lot to learn across the board, not just from up, but just along where you are. And then as far as being pigeonholed, I would say not against the transparency thing that say, because that's, paramount, but be sneaky. I remember there was one time I was working and they kept putting me on the same project. Oh, she's really good. Okay, great. Thanks for the compliment. But I really wanted to work on this other museum project when I was working in St. Louis. And I knew when the meeting was, this is probably not great to share, but I showed up with like a tape measure and I said, oh, you guys are having a meeting. That's great. And I knew about the project. I knew the architect working on it. So again, when I went back to pitch again, I really want to work on this museum. The principal said, well, but they have a lot of consultants, right? It's like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. So try to find ways where you can be prepared when you pitch to come out of your pigeonhole, that you can say, oh, okay, I want to do more field work. Okay, so then I'm observing the site and this is what I need to do. I've looked at the contract. So try to anticipate some of the questions or some of the things that are impeding you from having the opportunity you have. Because then I think the thing is you have to have experience in order to get the experience. And that's really such a vicious cycle, but like ask around.
I want to give a slightly different perspective on top of what Patricia is saying. There is an employer perspective, and we have to acknowledge that most likely the employer is a business, right? And you bring in a certain skill set that the firm benefits from, and therefore they are paying you to contribute effectively that way. When you are basically asking to play a role that you've never played in, right? Then from a business perspective, it sort of doesn't make sense. I mean, of course, employer, the nurturing the employer development, it's obviously, all important, but let's say strictly business perspective, it really doesn't make sense. So what I had to do was, being sneaky, that's one strategy. The other strategy might be, again, being reasonable, right? It might mean that you, instead of saying, okay, I'm done, I'm sick and tired of doing just renderings and Photoshop, I want to get some sort of a field exposure. Can you divide and conquer? Can you propose that, I've been doing this sort of a role for 100% for the last 2 years, but I know that, I lack these kind of experiences, but I know that the firm benefits from my fortes. So can I propose that, let's say 50% of my time, I continue to do what I'm really good at, and I continue to sort of, let's say, mentor, let's say, more junior staff so that they can actually learn the things that I'm good at. But in return, can I spend my 50% of the other time to do things, to learn things that I didn't get the exposure to, right? So there is a sort of a give and take, that a business case to be made, saying that you're going to continue to contribute effectively, but at the same time, can the firm also provide me with the kind of learnings that I'm looking for, right? So I think being reasonable, again, could be another way to sort of achieve not being pigeonholed into a specific role.
Thank you so much for all your answers. Does anyone have any question? Like, do you want to unmute and ask some questions before we go into Krista's question?
I don't have a question, but can I make a comment regarding to, so I'm Gerard Georges. I'm one of the co-chairs of BosNOMA, and I've just been listening to this very interesting and really experienced panels. It's great to hear your stories and your experiences and your information. One point I did want to make was regarding, I think, Sae, you had mentioned about communication, and it's not about using words and things like that. And I think, but I've experienced many interviewees come in and they have so much information that they want to relay, and it becomes one ramble session. And I think there's power in the pause. and there's power in practice. I just paused right there, and I just wanted to show how not to be afraid of that quiet space. And I think it takes time to learn that, but it'll help you kind of modulate your anxiety and really think through about what you're going to say. And you basically sound a lot more intelligent that way. So I just wanted to just throw that out as just a tip.
Amen.
Thanks, Jared. Anyone else?
I might just reinforce that in the context of if you're talking about a project you worked on, I've had plenty of interviewees that they were explaining every last detail of that project, which, yeah, you don't need to tell people. The main thing you need to do is set the context to explain the thinking that you did. What was your contribution? Just focus on that. Don't need to know all the details.
I guess we can answer to Krista's another question about the red flags. So are there any red flags to watch out for during the interview, like both for the firm or the interviewer?
I would say someone who's, I wouldn't say unwilling to learn, someone who probably comes to an interview thinking they're basically perfect, because I've been in this career for a short time, but I've already come to the realization that I'm going to be learning for forever. So I feel like the biggest red flag would be someone who thinks that there's not much more for them to learn, especially when you go to a different firm or you work on a project. There's always going to be a new and different experience. There are going to be different personalities and people. So the red flag for me would be someone who is unwilling to learn or change.
Can I clarify the question? Is Krista, are you asking the red flags, like the firm that would have a red flag? How do I phrase that? Are you talking about the candidate, red flag for the candidate, or red flag for the firm? That's I thought so. Okay, so red flag for the firm. I think, in this era, interview, how I like to think about it, it's not a one-way thing, right? I think in more and more we'll see that the interview is sort of taking a shape of more of a two-way, which means that it's not just the interviewer that's asking the candidate, what are your strengths, and tell me about yourself, but it's also vice versa. If the firm, the company that you're interviewing, is not willing to spend the time to tell you about their firm, their projects, for me, I think that speaks a lot about the firm, right? So for me, that would be sort of a one red flag. It's either the red flag for the firm, or the firm is not interested in you, which also would be a red flag, right? So I think the willingness to sort of talk to you and to also show you and tell you about what the firm is doing in the different projects, rather than just trying to get information out of you, I think is sort of one of the first things that comes to my mind.
Yes, I would say just kind of on that same point about the dialogue. I think if the interview doesn't feel like a comfortable conversation, it's probably not a good fit, and that's probably pretty obvious. But I know in the last 2 years, I was doing interviews, or at least informational get-to-know-you interviews, as I was exploring some different job options, and some of those were really fun conversations, and they were pretty spontaneous, and others felt like work to kind of get to the next question. And in those, I think you all kind of understand that, well, maybe we're not a great fit for each other, and that's okay. There will be some places like that, and then there'll be other places where it'll feel more natural.
I'll mention too, just through my experience, if you need visa assistance and that is not a conversation that they're willing to have, that's a red flag. If there's some very specific needs that you've explained and expressed, and there's no budging on the other end, that's a red flag. It's odd to think that a lot happens just down the street in Boston. We don't have to go too far in the world or in the country even, but you wouldn't think that, although you think that you've had a really great conversation, you have a follow-up, this is where you can sit, these are the people that you're going to be working with, then second, third interview comes around and say, actually, I need to have a conversation about my visa, and then you don't hear again. That's actually then a good thing, because they're not going to back you up. That's not a position that you need to be anyway. So they can't match some rights and even benefits too. If there's some things that you need to have, and that's not a conversation they're willing to extend. Talking to actually what Sae was saying too, it is a business, and there's totally the there's your wish, your need, and then there are your requirements, and then there's by luck somebody listens to you, and fortunately if scheduling works out, that's wonderful. If they're willing to support you and again, some basic human rights, and just to be able to provide a safe place to work, that's also a red flag. So
I
Thank you so
will
much.
re-answer since we clarified the question. A red flag for me is if you're looking on their website and doing research, there aren't any women in leadership or any people of color in leadership. And if you see that and you're still interested in the firm and you're going to the interview, if you're asking like, how do you support women in leadership roles or people of color, and they don't give you a real answer, that's a major red flag.
Absolutely. Great points, Whitney and Patricia. I just wanted to speak a little bit to Patricia's point with a recent experience that I had. So there was a recruiter that reached out to me, and he said he's impressed, and I'm sure a lot of you have had similar experiences. And then when I mentioned that I needed visa assistance, he just said, well, I'm sorry, the firms I'm working with is willing to do that. So, please let me know if you have anyone else who might be interested. And that's a really huge red flag, because, you have so many good candidates who need assistance, who need visa assistance, and you're not willing to provide that. And that says a lot about your firm, really. So yeah, that's a really great point, Patricia. Krista has another question. Any recommendations on preferences about how to approach the salary question? Is a range better than a single number? That's a great question, Krista.
I would say a single number. If you say a range, then it's basically going to be the low end of the range. So again, be reasonable, obviously, talk to your colleagues, talk to your friends, right? And look into the sort of the AIA, wherever you are, whether it's, your state or your city, right? There's usually sort of that average, information, Glassdoor. There are a lot of different resources where you can sort of gauge what the average is. But I would definitely suggest a single number. And also I would also say that, whatever the number that you are really thinking of, add 10% to that, and have that be the number, because there will always going to be the negotiation. And if you do come to CBT for an interview, don't tell them that I told you to do this. This is don't quote me on it, but I would go with a single number that is, let's say, 10 to 15% above what you're really looking for. And then what's ultimately going to happen is that, they're going to sort of give you an offer that is lower, and then you're going to end up meeting somewhere in the middle, right? But again, be reasonable, right?
I like that.
Sorry, I will say the AIA calculator for the New England region is not the best right now, because they don't have enough candidates. So the numbers they're giving aren't a good number to go off of. So the other suggestions they had, use those instead, and definitely speak to your peers, because that's where you'll get the most honest salary range.
And Krista, I'll also mention, I think that's a super question too. At CBT too, we're making a concerted effort in having more clarity, transparency, where if it's actually, if you were to say, oh, well, this is a really great place. I can see myself here for a couple of years. What are the promotions like? So, there's just a basic, if you have to pay for your student loans, if you have to just pay your rent, do everything just basic, there's that like baseline number. But then if it's just looking to see, okay, so in 3 years, it's not always guaranteed that you're going to get a promotion, or there's no checklist. I think it's just qualifications, where you've been able to contribute to the company. But then if you think that this is something that you can really, imagine to project yourself in a couple of years, maybe that's also an angle, to look for, not only indicating to them that you really see yourself there for a bit, but even just to be able to just, have a reasonable structure for yourself so you can have your, your livelihood. So that's also one of the things I think that in interviews, not so much for interns, but full time, I think if you have that conversation of, where do you see myself with my set of skills moving forward in your company as well? You don't have to come in with all the answers and all that you can offer, but just to have that discussion as well of, kind of like putting it out there to the world and have that conversation of, having a feel for where you may be able to fit, and then long term, rather than just being myopic of, this is, kind of a, just sign the dotted line and just, go on with your life. So maybe that's another way, Krista, but that's a great question.
Let's say ask about what are the opportunities to learn along the way too, not just lunch and learns, but are there opportunities to go to conferences? And most companies will not be able to budget a lot for, at least for entry level staff, but there should be some opportunities at the very least. Local conferences, ABX, things like that. If the firm's not willing to invest in you and your growth, then look elsewhere.
And Ben, actually, to your point, and Sae was talking about communication before, there are plenty of places at CBT we're trying to do that as well. We're talking about communication. There are plenty of places. We've done actually group training before, so it may not be directly to, being able to go to a conference per se, or, travel to Italy to look at marble and that kind of, but if there are some things that you can still do, and, that maybe that like uniqueness, okay, this is a person who's interested in improving what they already have, or an interest. So if it's communication, it's writing skills, I think that's overlooked in architecture as a profession. So it's just asking the question to see what else that type of investment that's done.
And if you're looking to get licensed, also ask them how they support you with that, because it's not cheap. And if you're looking to do a salary range, you need to budget for that as well if they're not going to offer you support.
Patricia, I know you said it's important to ask about the company you're interviewing at. And then a lot of people mentioned if you had quick interviews, you should focus on the project you're most passionate about. So how do you balance that if you have 15-minute speed interviews?
I know this voice and I know this name. Hi, Natalie.
Hi.
Hi. I love that you asked that question, because I think those are the interviews, the ones that go off script, are the most interesting. So if you do have 15 minutes this is personal, but I think having a portfolio is almost an excuse to see and hear how somebody thinks. Pick a project that it may be incomplete, and you can ask us questions design wise. What do you think I should have done differently? I really feel strongly about, this move that I made, or there were, questions I really want to experiment. So I think it's actually just picking one project, just one, and then try to have 3 things that you want the interviewers to know about you, personality wise, your skill set, and just practice that. And then I think the other projects, if you have time, they could be a variation thereof. Same thing for a resume. If you find there's something that you're really passionate about, I think we talked about community engagement or anything else, I think you can expand upon that. So then, we don't leave an interview going, wait, this person has 15 things to offer. Is that possible? It could be. But what are the 3 things that you want us to leave with? Natalie, I'm so glad to see you here. It's great.
I asked this question because I've been on 15-minute interviews with Patricia, and I've always seen how he gets so much out of them.
Thanks, Natalie.
So we're gonna go into our last question that Aswara asked. It's on how to search for a part-time internship while studying. And she said, I'm doing a career change and I'm so enthusiastic to start working in the field.
This might be an obvious answer, but some firms certainly reach out to the schools and places you may be studying. They may recruit there, or there may be faculty there who are familiar with different firms and their opportunities. So try to use that network or that context right there where you are studying to see what opportunities that might open.
I'm not exactly sure, what kind of situation this person is in, but I would caution trying to do too much at once. If I look back at, the studies that I've gone through, it's more than a full-time commitment to get the work done and to get myself really acclimated to the software, the language, the process. And if you certainly have extra time, which, in my experience, it's hard to imagine, I think there could be other things that you could be doing other than looking for a part-time internship. There are places, like CBT, we have like a winter externships, for example, and those are sort of like a short, sort of a 2-3 week kind of shadowing kind of an experience. You're not necessarily tasked to do like a project-based job, but you are part of, being, getting exposure to different types of meetings, getting different types of, workshops and things like that. And those I definitely encourage, right? But if you're actually talking about having, a few months of a part-time internship, you might end up in a situation where you're not fulfilling either of the tasks, let's say, as a student or as an intern. So I would just caution that. I mean, maybe you can very much do so, but if I was in your shoes, I wouldn't be able to do it. So definitely look for firms that do provide these kind of externships, visitorships, shadowing opportunity. If sometimes, it's not explicitly clear on their website that these offerings are available, which, goes back to the communication. Just reach out to different personnel that are at the office, LinkedIn, whatever, right? And then just ask the question of whether the firm provides that kind of an opportunity and what would be the channel that you can sort of apply for those kind of exposure.
And I'll say, Isalda, I think my email is here. Just email me. I'll talk to you anytime. I'm so thrilled and enthusiastic about your career change. I'm rooting for you. But to Sae's point, it's a lot to try to do. Not say that you couldn't do it, but I want to hear more from you. If you would like, I just happy to make time just to hear, where you're coming from or where you want to go. I'm rooting for you. Just send me an email. We'll make time, okay?
Thank you so much.
Of course, I'm rooting for you. Yeah.
Speaking from experience, I didn't have a choice but to work part-time while I was in school because I needed to afford how to live, So look to see if there are any research assistant jobs. but also look at local firms. I know in Charlotte, they had like a network of local firms that would take students to do internships while in school. So there was that understanding that, hey, like this is what you're getting, and they also have to do well in school. But I feel like with all the schools around Boston, if you are in Boston, look to see if there are any firms, like Sae was saying, that are offering externships or internships. I'd say the best way is to go through LinkedIn or just email the HR person on their website. But something will suffer. School will suffer, or the job will suffer. I'd say if you're at a point where you're almost starting your professional career, let the schoolwork suffer a little, because you're still going to get the same degree coming out as everyone else. Make sure you're doing your best and keep it going, because I understand you have to live and you have to pay bills at the same time. So
Thank you so much, Sol.
Thank you, everyone. That was incredible. This is certainly one of the more enriching conversations I've been a part of in a long time. Thank you to our panelists, Whitni, Ben, Patricia, and Sae. This could certainly go on for another couple hours.